Dean Homiuni of 3D Action Video Inc., back again to continue our journey. In the written part of the guide and not the video tutorials, we had an extensive discussion, approximately well over 100 pages, about the 20 rules of filming underwater. And we did a 3 recap page where we re-summarize those rules that we discussed in the guide under the 3-page heading, recap of the 20 underwater filming rules. And that's what we're going to go over right now. We're going to do something that's really fun, really exciting. We're going to talk about filming theory and how to wind up setting yourself up for that particular shot, and the use of water to give movement and also colorization to the shot. What I want everyone to do is, under sequences, if we could move forward, let's take a break and actually set up, under both film and sequences, 3 new lessons. Lesson 12, shooting angles in the use of water. Lesson 13, using a tripod. And lesson 14, making a movie in process flow. Under the sequences, let's go ahead and wind up setting up 3 additional sequences, which are going to have the same title. Lesson 12, shooting angles and the use of water. Lesson 13, using a tripod. And lesson 14, making a movie. If you forgot how to wind up making these bins, you just press film, collecting on the bin icon, and then you can type your title in. So I'll just go ahead and wind up deleting that out because I've already set mine up. And then under sequences, if you forgot how to set up a sequence, you're going to go to Sequence, File, New, Sequence. We always pick that ABCHD 1080i, ABCHD 1080i, 3060i, because I film at 60i, and type out these 3 sequences. Lesson 12, shooting angles in the use of water. Lesson 13, using a tripod. And lesson 14, making a movie in process flow. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this tutorial right now and give you a chance to catch up to me, and then when you're ready, go ahead and restart the tutorial. Now that you've restarted the tutorial, I have to assume that you've created the additional 3 bins under film, and you've created the additional 3 sequences under the sequence bin. What I want us to do is actually wind up coming into Explorer, and within here I'm going to drag it over, and under our lesson assets we have a lesson set 8. And in lesson set 8 is a file, shooting angles in the use of water. We've seen how to do this before. You can take this particular item and just drag it right on top of the bin under lesson 12 and pop it right in there, and that particular piece of film now appears. I want us to also go to your sequence you set up, lesson 12. Let's double click on that and drag that piece of film onto video 1. If it doesn't match, just say keep existing settings. Within here now, we have a piece of film that's going to have multiple scenes in it, and I'm going to talk about every one of these scenes and how the recap of the 20 underwater filming rules apply to these scenes. Basically, the film came in, it's about 3 minutes, it's kind of squashed. Let's go ahead and stretch this out, and we're going to talk about every one of these scenes one by one. But before we do it, I want us to go ahead and play through all the scenes. It's approximately 3 minutes, and then we'll have a discussion after this film is played. We're going to talk about quite a few scenes, and this discussion is going to be quite long, but it's going to be a lot of fun. This is what I love about taking this footage when it's dull and washed out and actually doing some of the corrections that we've talked about, including color correction, denoising, stabilization, sharpen, tools that we've looked at all the way down through this complete tutorial series. The first thing is, let's talk about this shot, which has got the Barracuda in it. And I just want to say something. The original film looked nothing like this, and it probably looked like a lot of your film when you come up, and we've talked about it before. What happened? I mean, my colors aren't here, and we've seen how to correct color, but I want to go over some of the rules. The most important rule that is always for me was Rule 7. Try to have water across the top 25% of your shot. Attempt to have water take up 1/2 of the screen area or 1/3 of the screen area if the water is in the shot at an angle. Water creates infinity space, perspective, and the rich blue will make the other colors pop. The other most important rules are always to use a red filter, except when using lights and filming in a macro environment. That was Rule 11. Rule 10, a 45-degree angle shot with surface water can provide an exciting viewing experience and an additional element of movement in the scene for the viewer. And we also talked about the use of a tripod up in Rule 4. Use a tripod if possible, but I recommend a private boat if you are going to use a tripod. Rule 2, film at 35 feet and less if possible for the best color results. Rule 8, take your time and swim in a semicircle until the tones in the water and the subject have the best look. Consider the angle of the sun and particulate matter when making a final decision of how to approach the subject. So these are very, very, very important rules, and we are going to discuss these in detail. In this scene, clearly that we'll go back and just play a little bit of it, and I'm going to hit the button. And everybody goes, how did you get that close to the Barracuda? Did you zoom? And I said, no, I didn't zoom. That's how close I had the camcorder. And we talked in the guide to get set before you start to approach the critter. Have your lights on. Have the critter in the middle of the screen. Think about your shot you're going to do. Get that critter, that subject, within the middle of your viewfinder so that when you start to approach that critter or subject, you're not going to scare them off. I can guarantee you, if I came up with my unit, was shaking it around, fiddling with the viewfinder, positioning my lights, turn them on, this Barracuda is gone. Let's take a look at it again. He's just sitting there. One of the things I want you to notice as part of this scene is we have a tremendous amount of blue in this scene, and we talked about this extensively as part of the guide. When you come in to do colorization, you're acting as an artist. And that deep, rich blue water, which is why I love to have a lot of water in my scenes, makes everything else pop. The reds and the yellows. Look how those colors are popping out as compared to the blue water. That's why I really kind of darken this water a little, which maybe is not exactly the way the water looks. But I did discuss in the book about going to seeing the McNeil Lear or even your news station, and what you're going to notice is they use extensive dark blue because blue makes yellows, whites, and reds pop. That's why it's very important for us to use Boris Continuum Complete in the matting system to only wind up affecting that watercolor, because I like to get a little darker blue to make all my other colors pop in here. And we can see what's happened. We have our critter in the middle of the screen, our position, we're trying to follow all the rules. We have the one eye roll going on where the critter is facing us in the front. And if you follow that one eye roll, you will always have these great shots. And let's just play it again. Look how great this shot is. It's a great shot. Let's move over to the next scene, which is where we have a very large grouper. Once again, we're following the rule of water across the top of the screen. In fact, let's go back to the prior rule. Water across the top of the screen. So we're trying to have water across the top of the screen. We've darkened it blue to make those reds really pop. We're following our one eye roll. And I kind of like this shot because this scuba diver Sandy McNaughton is in it, and it's really giving a perspective to how big this critter is. And a lot of times when you're filming, you're going along and you're filming a critter up against a reef, and the grouper is gigantic, and then you go play it, and because you had nothing in there to measure it by, no one really knows how large that grouper is. My rule of thumb, if I am going to have a diver in a scene, I only want one. I am not going to have more than one. If you start having more than one diver, it becomes somewhat unnatural. It gives the impression that you're on a cattle boat tour and that the production was not really very high end. So let's go ahead and move over to our other scene. And this is once again another grouper shot. We have good perspective, and you can see the one eye roll. Now I want us to look at something right here that we had talked about Boris Continuum Complete, that the tools were good until a certain level, and we talked about the pixelization issue and how some of these techniques really will not work on a big screen, and a big screen really requires 4K film and up, and we were filming this here with the JVC Pro HD in Cozumel when we still didn't have the Panasonic unit filmed out. And see this little edge line here where it's meeting the coral? We didn't really get a clean cutoff, and this scene was somewhat problematic. Normally I would have thrown it out. We can see all these edges around here regarding around the scuba diver. You see all this right here? You can see all that right there. See all that? That is problematic. If I didn't have a big grouper in this shot, I would have just thrown this film out, but because we had such a big grouper, I didn't want to throw it out. I just want you to understand some of the limitations when we're doing these color corrections using some of these tools. It may be problematic, and you have to look for those edge lines to see whether or not that we're having a tremendous issue around here. Once again, around his suit, clearly that's visible. So Hollywood would never really wind up accepting this, and that's where you need a higher end program to really go in and correct these type of colorization issues. Let's go to our next scene again. And this is a shot of a grouper. We have no water, but this comes into the fact of the 1 or 2 eye roll. Even though we have no water in this scene, we have both eyes, this particular critter staring directly into us. It's a really good scene, but because we have no diver in here, you have no perspective of how large this grouper was, and this grouper was huge. Well, let's go to our next scene. I really enjoy this scene. Now, one of the things that a lot of people don't do but can wind up being problematic is many times if I have a scene that I have a critter sitting on the bottom of the ocean, I'm going to take my unit and put it directly into the sand and have it completely stable. We have a little red going on here, so I could color correct this film a little better. And you have to be careful about these red shadows coming in when you're using lights with a red filter on, because you will wind up getting this tone into the sand. The two things I wanted to talk about in this scene is I approached this ray with all of my gear set up from 20 feet away. I had my lights ready to go. I had the ray sitting in the middle of the viewfinder. I swam in a semicircle of some of the issues that we talked about in the filming guide until I got ahead of the Stingray with him facing me front on, and that was the way that I wound up approaching him. But clearly that we got an excellent shot here. Both eyes are in the view. We have the camcorder really sitting in the sand, and we are not moving it. This scene here is a sea anemone, and what I want to point out is a couple things. Our roll, water across the top of the screen, taking up 1/2 to 1/3. We darken the water a little, and look how that dark blue, that rich dark blue that we talk about in the guide, makes those yellows and red pop. That is just amazing, and that's where we're coming in and being a painter. And the water, the original watercolor, isn't this dark a blue. I'm really making it that way to make these other colors pop. This was a sea anemone, which I filmed at night. And within here, of course, I would have to denoise the film again. You can see some little noise right in here going on. But I put my camcorder, once again, right on the bottom, right in the sand, and filmed. I didn't move it. I wasn't swimming around. But when you do that, you got to be careful, because you might wind up getting some fine particles and sand go up against the gasket, and you might wind up getting some slight leaking if you use this technique. You have to be very careful. Let's go on to our next scene, which is a tarpon coming in. And let's go back and talk about what's going on here. First, a lot of people, when they get a big fish, they see it coming, man, they swing that fish, they swing that camera around, and they try to keep that fish in the middle of the camera, and the camera's all over the place. I was filming on a tripod here, and I was just letting the camcorder run and let the fish act in their natural environment. I did not move the camcorder, and we talk about trying to film in a fish tank where we have great buoyancy or the use of a tripod. I just allowed the camcorder to roll and did not chase the tarpon after he got out of the scene. It was very natural. In this particular scene, again, with my wife Susan swimming on Columbia Wall at Cozumel, look at all the water that we have in the scene, and look how that dark blue makes this coral pop. And of course, if we've denoised, you notice that we don't have any blurring going on in the coral. With her in this particular scene, that is adding perspective to the shot. And on these deep scenes like this, which have got a lot of far away angles on them, that is when I like to have one single scuba diver in the shot to add perspective to the scene, because clearly you understand how big these coral heads are at that point. I mean, they're just massive. Without a scuba diver being in here, it doesn't really create that sense of how big some of these coral heads are. I rarely or infrequently have scuba divers in my scene, but in these type of situations where you're trying to bring out how magnificent these wonders of God really are, this is where it's nice to have a scuba diver in the scene. This scene I filmed on La Dagna's Leap in Bonaire, which is probably my favorite dive. And the reef starts in approximately 20 feet of water. You have massive coral growth at 30 feet, which provides you plenty of light. And we'll talk about this scene here. Let's just play a little bit of it, and then we'll have a discussion. What I did was, we talked about when we're swimming along the reef, you try to point a line, and you do not want to go to the left or right or up and down. You want to swim consistently along the reef. And as you approach the subject, we actually talked about a critter. As you get closer, that creates a zoom effect. And it's really cool. It creates some additional movement in the scene. We can see the wonderful coral, which is on Bonaire. It's just magnificent. And they also have a lot of tube sponge growth there, which is really cool because you have yellow, green, and purple tube sponges. And that really makes the color pop. And once again, we're adhering to our rules. Water across the top. We darken it to a dark blue, which is not necessarily the way the color of that water looks, but it's really making those oranges and reds and light brown colors on the coral really pop. This scene is a classic example of a couple different things that we talked about. One, use of water across the top. And I purposely position this camcorder, no matter what, I want water across the top for a couple reasons. It's more natural to not to have a break. And the second reason is in 3D, when these corals are coming out of the screen, if you have something touching the top of the screen, that can wind up wrecking your 3D effect. In fact, let's go back and take a look at some of the other scenes that you'll notice. The reason I follow that rule is because I'm also filming in 3D, which I don't want. I try to limit what's actually hitting the screen. But let's go ahead and play this little short piece right here. And I was filming on a tripod at this point. You notice no matter what comes swimming by, I have it on a tripod. I use my stabilization rolls. We're going with the lockdown effect, which is really cool. The fish are swimming in and out, almost like that we're in watching an aquarium at home, and we're not moving that camera. We have the camera pointed up at a 45-degree angle, as we talked about in Rule 10. 45-degree angle shot with surface water can provide an exciting viewing experience and an additional element of movement in the scene for the water. And let's take a look at this, and we're going to notice the water is moving. It's giving us a movement element along with the fish, but that coral is perfectly still, and we have our lockdown effect. At this scene, we're swimming along the reef. And I'm going to re-emphasize a point again because I really started this shot from way, way, way back, and it went on for probably 15 seconds, where I picked my beeline to the coral head and did not swing my camera around depending upon what was coming in front of it. I just kept swimming in that straight line, and you'll notice as I get closer to the coral head, it creates a natural zoom effect. Same concepts, water across the top, taking up quite a lot of the screen. We have a good mixture of coral and also fish in this scene. We'll come to our next one, which is another example of a lockdown scene. I filmed this using a tripod, darken the water to get those reds, somewhat yellow and brownish and yellow corals to really pop because we have that dark blue. And look what's happened to the fish because we have that dark blue. Those yellows really come out. Adhering to our rules again, water across the top of the screen, water taking up approximately half of the shot, which gives it a sense of perspective. And by having water across it, what's really kind of nice is you get all these fish floating around, which then add depth to your scene, especially in 3D versus just pointing your camera directly into the coral that you're going to wind up losing depth. This next shot is a great shot. I got this in Cozumel. This was a turtle. I laid the camera right down in the sand, but my approach coming up to this critter involved a tremendous amount of prep work. I saw the turtle sitting there eating coral. I did not wind up approaching it. I got my camera completely set up, the turtle in the middle of the shot, my lights on. I approached, and then I positioned the camera to once again adhere to our rules. Darker blue water to make those yellows. Look at those yellows just pop. And then we also have water across the top with the critter trying to be in the middle of the shot. So once again, that you'll see that many of these scenes are working because of our use of water, and we talk about that particular critical nature. And you're going to notice even if the critter moved, I did not move the camera. I'm making him look natural. This scene, my wife Susan is floating along with the fish. I'm not following her. I'm not moving the camera to follow her in this scene. I'm just leaving the camera as is, and she actually comes swimming all the way through, and it was just really, really natural. But once again, I want us to look at the darker blue, the use of the colors, the way that we denoise the water but not the coral, and therefore you still have this crispness to the coral. A very, very nice scene. One of the things I used to do when I first started filming was I would always follow the critters and follow the character that was in the scene. And all I got was a bunch of blurry film with shaking all over the place with most of these critters and even the person not being in the middle. So that's why after years and years of experience, I said, you know something, I'm just going to leave the camera, let it sit there and run, try to get a lockdown effect using a tripod, and let the activity go on around me, which is actually more natural. And by having the camera sitting there and set up, the fish will actually wind up coming to you after about 2 or 3 minutes. You get surrounded by fish, and then it even becomes more natural. This shot is the same barracuda shot we saw before. Let's go ahead and play it. I am not moving that camera at all. Here I had it sitting in the sand, and I just let that barracuda move. I wasn't moving the camera, trying to be natural. This is a shot where we're going once again on the lockdown effect after using the stabilization tools. You'll notice there is absolutely no movement in that film. The blue is making our purples, reds, and yellows just really pop out by using that darker color. It's a fantastic scene. I'm not moving the camera around. It just appears really, really natural. This is a shot of, once again, my wife Susan. She was coming out of a swim through, probably at Columbia Wall in Cozumel. I just sat there, did not follow her, and just let her do her thing, tried to keep her in the middle of the screen, but tried not to move that camera. This is a really, really nice shot that I like, and we'll play it. And you'll notice all the little critters going on around that coral head. And we talked about that I've learned to just slow down and allow these camcorders sometimes to roll for 3 to 5 minutes. And after you wind up getting set up and your tripod set up, all these little critters are going to wind up coming out again. But the way you need to position the camera is that look at all this water I have all across the top. Once again, the same rules. We darken the water using the matting system as we saw in the prior lessons. And that really makes all these other colors really come out, especially the yellow on that one fish. Look at it. It's amazing. The main thing is about here, just slow down. You don't have to be constantly moving the camera. Don't chase critters. A lot of people, they would see something like a tang and they swing the camera around. I don't do that anymore. Just be really nice, and actually it becomes a more enjoyable dive, and your dives actually last longer because when you're filming, you're lugging the camera around, you're moving it, you're turning it on and off. Any movement you have is going to result in the extra use of air, and once these particular scenes are set up, you can sit there and really wind up having a longer time to film. This was a scene I was coming over a coral head, and in 3D, this scene is fantastic. But I want to talk about movement here, where what I'm doing is I'm trying to come in a straight line and slightly rising up to go over this coral head, and look at the great movement that creates. Look at the great movement that creates of coming up and moving forward. But another thing I want you to notice is I'm trying to keep my scene, my camcorder, where I'm not going to have coral touch the top of the screen. That's one of the techniques I try to use. This was a scene that I filmed at Windsox, which is right across the street from the airport in Bonaire. In 3D, this is just a fantastic scene. These fish are coming 6-7 feet out of the television set. I filmed this in about 5 feet of water. I had some water movement up top. I did my colorization techniques, and I do not move that camcorder. I do not chase the fish. I'm going for that lockdown effect that allows the action to come to me instead of me going to the action. This scene was filmed off of the pier at the Plaza in Bonaire, which is another amazing dive, by the way, that you go right off that dock, and in 5 feet of water in unbelievable filming conditions, there's thousands of fish and great coral right there. So you can really get these colors to come back. And I actually got about a 20-minute clip of this particular location along where the dock structure is. And I just had the funnest time on this dive because I was able to get these brilliant yellows to come back, which was really just magnificent. But one thing I want you to notice is I was in a current and getting swayed back and forth. And when we talk about overweighting yourself, that was one of the rules, that if you're going to use a tripod to overweight yourself, this is where I let all the air out of my BC I set up in the sand. And that extra weight I had to push down on that tripod with the camcorder on top of it to keep this steady. But once again, the fish are just naturally moving back and forth in their environment with the current that's pushing them around. We try to keep water across the top to 1/2 to 1/3. That creates a darker color that makes all these yellows really pop out. It's just a fantastic scene. This was another lockdown effect tripod scene where I'm filming straight ahead. What are the concepts? A little darker water, coral sitting in 1/3 to 1/2 of the screen, water across the top to create that perspective. In this scene, of course, none of these fish or coral look like this. I put a purple tone to it along with a little red in there, and I was really acting as a painter to give an artistic side to the scene. A lot of times there's one camp that says that your colors have got to be perfectly exactly the way that you're filming them. I like to go in and wind up experimenting and using colors to make a mood to the scene, and here I wanted to darken it a little. This is a shot of a turtle. Once again, that's my wife Susan in there. What are the concepts? We're trying to keep water across the top. We have a diver in there creating perspective. We have the one eye rule going on. That darker water is really making some of our corals pop out. And it just appears natural of having this perspective with the one eye roll. We're not facing the turtle from the back, and therefore we get a shot that makes sense along with some movement in it. We'll just play it forward. This is a continuation of that shot, and look at all the water which is in this scene. It's a huge amount of water. It was just a really, really tremendous shot with one scuba diver in there, giving us perspective of really how big this sea turtle is. We tried to keep the one eye rule again, but the turtle was getting away from us. But I didn't want to lose this scene. It's just a fantastic scene. The way you use water and the way we try to keep our camcorder steady. This scene is where I was chasing a relatively baby turtle in Bonaire, and I'm kind of swimming along. I'm trying to keep him in the middle of the screen, and I'm going to make a comment right now about white balancing. And there are people that before they shoot a shot, they insist that you do white balancing. And the nice thing about the Z10 HTC Z10000 Panasonic, it does have a white balance button on it. It can be somewhat problematic to get to using the Equinox housing, and it's always nice to wind up hitting that white balance first to make sure that you have your camera properly calibrated. And I did read a nice little hint that really high-end professional underwater videographers actually use white fins, so when they want a white balance, they just point to their fin and go. But I'm going to make some comments here about this. I went scuba diving with a relatively famous underwater videographer, and he had a very complicated setup with about 20 buttons on it, and we would go down, and I watched him while we were diving, and he spent 75% of the dive fiddling with his buttons. And in the book, I talked about that I just like to use power on and off, shoot. I don't really use zoom. I want to concentrate on maintaining my buoyancy, which is very important, getting my shots set up, trying to keep that critter in the middle of the screen as I'm filming them and chasing a critter swimming in a three-dimensional plane. Because the one thing that we all got to remember is these critters do not stand still. They do not pose for a camera. They move in 3 dimensions. And I talked about this in the book. We are not filming topside on a tripod and have 15 minutes to get our camera properly calibrated to get our shot. Mother Nature is going to bring it by, and when you see something like a turtle, you have to go. You cannot hesitate. You have to approach that critter while you're trying to get your camera set up. The basics, which is lights, getting it focused in the middle of your viewfinder, and being calm so you have good buoyancy to go after this critter. So those are just some of the concepts I want us to remember. Now on this shot, which is really cool, especially in 3D, I actually filmed this fire coral patch over these couple scenes, and I ask people all the time, I go, how tall do you think this fire coral was? And they go 10 feet. This fire coral was 3 feet tall. And the way I got these particular scenes, I was swimming in a horizontal position and literally took my camera and put my arm straight down so I got lower to a coral, was coming right off the coral. And that's why I like the Equinox design, where they have the external monitor sitting on a ball joint on top of the housing, because that allows me to bend it in the angles. So usually my monitor is sitting up on the ball joint straight up, but for these type of scenes, when I'm going to extend my hand all the way down, I loosen up the ball joint and flip the monitor where the backside lays right on top of the housing, and then I look down as I wind up doing my filming. And you can get some really cool rising effects if you wind up using that, getting really close to the coral as you're still floating above the coral, but your arms are hanging down, and therefore you're getting those lower shots that allow you to get these great angles and the flexibility to be able to raise your camcorder above the coral. Before that, we talked about a concept that when you're filming, wear a full wetsuit, because this fire coral, if you touch it, your skin is going to be messed up for about 2 weeks, and a lot of time it scabs over, or you may get a bruise. And that's why I wear a full wetsuit, because I'm going along, I'm looking at that 5-inch monitor, I may not be paying attention to what's going on, and I jam up against some of this coral, and it's hard, and it can cause bruises, scratches, and also a sting to your skin if in fact that you get hit. But some of the other concepts is all the water that we have in the scene. For some reason, beginning videographers feel that they have to have coral completely fills up the scene, and you lose that beautiful blue color that I really like. Our next scene, I want to talk about using movement. And let's take a look at this, and what you're going to notice is I'm rising as I'm filming, but I'm not moving that camcorder. I'm keeping it steady. A lot of times I'll bring the camcorder and I shove it right up to my chest and I hold it, and that's going to cause a slight natural rise in me to start to go up. And look at that effect as I'm rising. The fish are coming in the scene. Let's take a look at that again. So I have it right up against my chest, pulled up against my chest. So I'm going to keep that camcorder steady, and I'm getting a natural movement in the camcorder that looks really cool. This is once again another example of a tripod lockdown scene where I have it on the tripod, and what you're going to notice is I'm not going to chase the critter. Let's go back and take a look at both of these scenes again, and the next scene coming up where I am in a lockdown mode filming on a tripod, and even though a gigantic parrotfish comes by, I do not turn that camcorder. And on this trumpet fish, when he starts to take off, I do not move that camcorder. It just starts to appear natural, and you're going to see how these steady lockdown shots using the stabilization tools really make really nice shots. Our next scene is where I'm just filming a little piece of coral, and we're going to see a bunch of little life going on around that coral. Here, once again, that we had another lockdown shot filmed on a tripod, and once everything gets settled down, all these little fish wind up coming out again, and you see the true nature of the life really going on in the reef. And I may just sit here and film for 5 minutes and get my shot. Of course, I go and I colorize the blue. Remember, we talked about on shots where we have water coming vertical down across it, we want coral on one side and water taking up approximately a third of the screen. We darken the water, and that makes these coral colors really pop. So these are all of the type of little rules that we talked about the use of water. Especially in 3D, it really creates that perspective. Here we have some purplish type of coral with reds and yellows, and that darker color of the water really makes all these corals pop out. Another shot of that same grouper. We got very close. Once again, we were set up. He calmed down. We were able to get closer. We have a one eye roll. Clearly the eye, just look how great this shot is. This is just a fantastic shot. If you're set up and you approach these critters methodically without scaring them off, you can easily wind up getting these shots, but you have to do it slow. If you come up swimming, full speed ahead, adjusting all your stuff, lights going all over the place, they're gone. Just calm down and go slow. That's what filming's about. This is a shot that I took at night. Pretty clear. We have an eel. I put the camcorder right into the sand. I adjusted it where the critter was in the middle of the screen, this black spotted eel, and once again we have the one eye roll where I went around and got positioned so I would have the proper shot. This scene here, of course, we haven't toned down. We have some hot spots on it, but let's take a look at these. These are shots where I'm just sitting here on a tripod. I've stabilized the film. I've really darkened that water, but look how it really makes these yellows pop. And of course, I'm not done color correcting this film. I would come in and actually tone down these hot spots in here, and we also did not apply the sharpen tool with it. But just look at this scene, the perspective, a coral much larger in the front, great colors. We get some other mid-tones, browns, and as we get farther away from the camcorder, of course, water starts absorbing colors. We start losing some of the colors, but it just gives a color scheme all the way through, and then what finally winds up hitting that dark blue water. Same concept, water in half of the screen, water across the top, and we allow the activity to come to us. This is a scene where we talked about that you can put water and the movement of the water, where you try to have your camcorder below the subjects you're filming at a 45-degree angle. But I want to talk about a concept here real quick that I talked about being strategic until you get to the point that the color of the water is going to wind up having the tone to it. And that if you wind up filming into directly to angle the sun, we can clearly see the sun is coming from here. A lot of times you're not going to be able to darken this water and get it the tone you want. These are some of the concepts we actually talk about. Again, water across the top of the screen, trying to take up approximately half of the film. Here's a scene with a sea anemone. Same concepts, a lot of water, giving us perspective. That dark blue is really making these other colors pop. We have the sea anemone, which is a third color, and we're just going to let the camera roll as the fish kind of swim around in the back. This is where I came a little closer, but I'm still following the same rule. If we have a vertical shot, water taking up a third to a half, always going across the top of the screen. At first, you always wind up getting the critter, and then it's going to move in a natural environment and just feel much more natural when those tentacles are moving around and they're not hitting the top of the screen. This shot I want to talk about again. We had a lot of the stuff right. We had water across the top, taking up a third to a half of the screen. We're facing the camcorder into the sun, and looked what happened. All of our water got washed out. It's not going to be a savable shot. We just had way too much lightness in here. It would take a tremendous amount of work to wind up getting this to work. In the end, that this shot would wind up getting cut out. And I just wanted to give you an example about being strategic when you actually go to set up. The one thing you want to make sure is that that tone in the water is going to be a little darker blue than this for us to be able to fix it. Otherwise, you wind up spending the time and effort of getting that tripod set up, and you're not going to wind up using the film. But clearly, we can see how magnificent when we have that proper watercolor tone, and we're using a lockdown effect, and we have water, a tremendous amount of water with all the critters swimming in the background, creating that dark blue that's making the purples pop, the reds and orange really come out, the light yellows and even the brown colors are magnificent, and it just creates a wonderful shot of what the ocean is really like. In this particular shot here, I set up the sea anemone in the middle of the screen. I want all of his tentacles going out. I wasn't able to get a shot where nothing was touching the top of the water, but I really the top of the screen, but I really planned it like this because we had some colorful corals surrounding the sea anemone. I had one in the front that would help flag the 3D effect. And this is just another beautiful shot that I really enjoyed. On here, I'd probably go in and maybe darken the color of the water a little more. On this shot, I had to swim around 3 times looking in my viewfinder monitor until I finally found an angle where the water got dark enough that I knew I was going to be able to fix it in post-production and create that sense and tone to make the other colors pop. This is a scene that I'm going to play for a little while, and then we'll talk about some of the concepts. On this scene, what happens is we're swimming along the reef, and I said, when you're doing a scene swimming along the reef, you don't want that camcorder moving up and down or going to the left and right. Pick a spot and then make a beeline for it. So in this shot, my beeline was right up here. I wind up positioning myself, and then I'm swimming. You notice I'm coming to the beeline. I'm trying not to move to the left or right. I'm going to talk about some of the issues regarding matting. We'll notice that I brought that mat down too far. We have some blue leakage going on. We come along. You can really see this leakage going on around here. It's not really appropriate. In this scene, I probably should have laid down about 15 mats. As I get to the top, it gets a little bigger. Look right here that you'll see the leakage and the colors going on. And this is where you really have to make multiple mats and be really more precise on what you're doing. And even I get lazy sometimes, I don't do it. But probably in a scene like this that has a changing watercolor and blues, you'll notice as we get come up to the lower depths, look how blue that water gets. And I really should have laid down multiple mats to properly colorize this water. Did a little better delineation between the scenes of the water and coral, and then move forward from that point. That's where I said that when you wind up getting that leakage, see how that brown comes back right now? When you wind up getting that leakage, you really got to lay down the multiple mats, but I tried to keep water across the top of the screen. This is another lockdown shot where I'm just letting the camcorder sit there and let all the activity happen, and you'll see these shots. I'm not really moving that camcorder. I'm not following any fish. I'm just going to let it roll, and you can wind up getting some fantastic shots. Now, in here, I haven't applied the color flicker yet, and if I would have wound up applying the GenArts color flicker routine, that would wind up really fixing all these colorizations by hitting it on this one particular frame here with that great red, and then I wouldn't get that right there. You see that variance right there? I wouldn't get that. So this is especially it gets brighter. We have a little flicker going on right there. So that's where you would use that remove color flicker from fire, would really clean all this up. It's the same concept. A lot of water, darker blue, trying to get water across the top and let that action just happen. And then finally in this scene, these are two elkhorn. We got some great yellow. Look how that dark blue just make these yellows pop. Everything across the top of the scene so that we're adhering to our roles, really giving us a perspective background, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful shot. And we'll just let this play along with the fish swimming all around. This is another scene where I just took it and repositioned the camcorder. I had the coral sitting off to the left. I have some of the arms coming out. We have activity going on regarding fish. Just another really cool scene in 3D. All these arms like this come shooting out of the screen. It's a really cool 3D effect, but yet we have all these fish moving around in this particular scene. It's completely lifelike, that we can see how Boris optical stabilizer really locks down that film and just makes it wonderful, that it looks like you're looking at a fish tank, which is very natural. With that being said, I hope all of you, by going over these clips, understand some of the concepts that we were talking about in the book, which is really a strategy guide and not a film correction guide about how you wind up setting up your shots so that you wind up getting the proper tone and the color, and that's going to be gained through experience, and how you try to wind up getting the lockdown effect on these particular shots, which just creates something more professional. Always remember that if you darken the water a little, you're really going to wind up making those yellows, reds, and browns really pop out of the screen. If you're floating along in a really nice type of shot is to have a slight rise, you can bring your unit directly into your chest, hold it against it, that will create some stabilization, and you will naturally rise slowly to create a movement effect. On some of your lockdown effects, if you're at 20 or 30 feet, try to position that camcorder that you're pointing up, and you wind up getting some movement in there at a 45-degree angle. Try to avoid having your camcorder pointing up at the water at the same direction as the sun, because you're going to wind up getting washed out effects. And that's where it's very important to look at the tone of the color in your viewfinder before you start the film, to make sure the sun is not going to wash it out. And once again, that is going to be gained through experience, filming techniques, some frustration, throwing a lot of good clips out you thought were going to work. But in the end, just like golf, the more you practice, the better you're going to get. So with that, I know that this was a very long lesson, but I felt it was important to step you all through some of these concepts and to go through some of these clips. The last subject I want to talk about in this guide is that under Rule 1, we said to test your camcorder at various depths and make a determination of where the performance is. And this shot here, I talked in the guide where I went to the Grand Caymans and the HDZ Z10000 did not show up. It was stuck in customs. And I really wanted to dye the magnificent wall dyes that the Grand Caymans were known for. And it took all of my fortitude and strength to turn around and say, no, I can't do it. I need to turn around and understand what the limits of my camcorders are and strictly adhere to filming at those depth limits that my camcorders could handle. So all these shots, this shot I got using the JVC at 30 feet JVC. This I used the HDZ Z10000. I filmed this shot using the JVC camcorder. And these turtle shots also using the JVC camcorder. So by sticking to these depth limits, instead of going out and filming for 3 days and basically winding up with nothing, I wound up getting a lot of tremendous shots, which I then mixed in with the deep wall dives to really make an outstanding sequence of film clips. Versus I could have gone out for 3 days and done wall dives and got nothing, and then I would have got home and been completely ticked off at myself. The first thing you always need to do when you get that camcorder in that housing and the red filter and lights is go and test your camcorder under Rule 1 to understand what depth you're going to be able to get these great colors to come back. And if you want great colors, you are going to have to adhere to those depths. And if you deviate from them, there's only going to be one person to blame, and that is going to be yourself. But if you wind up sticking within the capabilities of your camcorder, you are going to wind up with some fantastic shots with great colors that all of the members of your dot club are going to be envious of. And with that, I'm going to terminate and end this lesson. I think we spent about 55 minutes on it, but I just wanted to spend some time here to talk about some of these shooting strategy, including the use of water to create the perspective, making sure that you have your camcorder properly set up for that correct tone, and that is going to make those purples, reds, yellows, and browns really come out.